On the website, you'll see a PDF file, which is from the Pew Research Center. It is a research report that they recently completed in September of this year that has to do with Americans and text messaging. In the spring of this year, they did a follow-up survey to some surveys they've been doing the last couple of years so that they can mark the trend of people using text messages, and in fact, how are people using text messages, as well as voice messaging. So that's what this PDF is about, and I thought I would work through it with you for a few minutes just to show you some of the highlights. So we start with this first graph, which is about the number of text messages sent and received per day, and they have a summary here from 2009 to 2011. The graph is broken up into two different types of data. The first on the left is a mean, which of course is just the average number of text messages per day, and the bars on the right have to do with the median, which of course is the midpoint of all the people they surveyed. They put all their responses in order, and they said, what is the exact middle point people said, so that would be the median. Keep in mind, the median then means that there would be an equal number of responses above that number as there is below that number. Okay? So if we take a look at this, we'll notice right over here, we look at 2009, that in the fall of 2009 there were 20.7 messages, 29.7 messages sent or received per day. That number jumped up to 39.1 in 2010 and up to 41.5 in the spring of 2011. The median also had a jump from 5 up to 10 and leveled off from 2010-2011. Now what this tells us quite simply is that the number of text messages being sent is increasing. Now, they broke the data down in a slightly different way on this particular graph, kind of an interesting way of doing it, looking at the number of text messages sent and received per day by age group. So what that means here is, if we look at this number, 109.5, that's the average number of text messages sent per day or received, sent and received, by people who are between the ages of 18 and 24. Now, 109.5 is the average. We drop down, we see that 50 is the median. Now what that tells us is there are some people who are sending out a boatload of text messages or receiving text messages. The median is 50, but the average is 105. That means there are some people at the top of this list that are really sending out a lot of messages. Well, as we move down the graph here, you see we go in this direction. We'll notice that as we get older, people are going to send fewer text messages. And that's not a big surprise. That's the kind of thing we would expect. Younger people use text messaging more than older people. So we have a nice, clean, inverse proportion between age and the number of messages sent out. The next table here deals with the number of text messages sent and received per day by different groups. In other words, that other graph was just age. This has to do with gender, age, race and ethnicity, household income, and education level. Now they did the groupings a little bit different in age, so we're going to notice right down here, when we come right immediately to age, we'll see that the average from 18 to 29 is 87.7. Now that age group in the previous graph was 18 to 24. So as we get people who are older, of course that average is going to come down. Notice that in gender we see not a very much of a difference here in the mean between the men and the women, but we do get a difference of 5 messages per day in terms of the median. That would tell us pretty clearly that women are sending more messages than men, or sending and receiving more messages than men. In the age group, we see the same thing we just saw in the last chart. That is that as people get older, they're going to have a tendency to send fewer messages. As we move down this and look at the race and ethnicity, we see here that white non-Hispanics are sending out 31.2 messages, sending and receiving. Look at this, black non-Hispanics, 70.1, a much, much higher average. The Hispanics, 48.9, more than the white non-Hispanics, but less than the black non-Hispanics. Notice, though, that between the black non-Hispanic and the Hispanics, that the median is the same. So again, what that means is that there are some people, some of the black non-Hispanics are sending out a whole bunch of them. But if we look at all 2,200 answers in a row, we'll see that there are the equal number of people sending more than 20 as they're sending less than 20. As we move down this table to the household income, we'll notice here that we go in the medians from 20 to 15 to 10 to 10, which tells us again that the people who have less income, which would make sense because that would be the group of 18 to 24, which typically made up of a lot of college students, a lot of young people who don't make as much money, they're going to be the ones sending out most text messages. So that number there doesn't surprise us. If we look at the education level, no surprises there either. Again, the people who are 18 to 24 or 18 to 29 have less education. They're younger, so they'll be sending out more text messages. So the people that have less than high school, we're sending out an average of 69, sending and receiving, I should say, but less than 69. High school diploma 45. But look at this, some college goes up. Their mean is actually higher than the people with the high school diploma. So there's a slight hiccup there in our nice, neat graph. However, the medians are the same. So that means that there's not going to be a whole lot of difference. And then, of course, people who have college or more, they're going to be sending out fewer messages than people who have less education. Now, we do know that the cell phone can be used for something other than text messaging, and that is we can make phone calls. So here we have a chart or a graph that deals with the number of phone calls made and received. We notice that the mean over here in 2010, 13.1, dropped slightly to 12.3 in 2011. That's not a substantial drop. Notice that the two medians are the same. So what that tells us is the usage of the telephone to make phone calls as a telephone device is really not changing. Staying pretty much the same between those 2 years. So we'll now look at the number of voice calls per day by the different groups that we just looked at a second ago. Gender, age, race and ethnicity, household income, and education level. And we'll see here that men appear to be making more phone calls than women. And the median is slightly higher. Not a whole big difference, but there's a little bit of a difference. As we move down to age, we'll see that the younger people make more phone calls, as we have the very nice, neat inverse proportion still in the number of phone calls. What this tells us in general is that between text messages, where young people are using more text messages, they're also making more phone calls. They're just communicating more. They're using the device more than the older people as a communication device. If we drop down here and look at the race and ethnicity, we'll find the same thing we saw with text messaging, and that is that the white non-Hispanic is making fewer phone calls than either the black non-Hispanic or the Hispanic. In fact, they're making about twice as many calls, both on the average and over here on the median. So the black non-Hispanics and the Hispanics just using the device more communication going on. Household income. Here we see pretty much what we would expect, I suppose. One thing that might look a little bit odd is that when we get to 75,000, we actually go up from 50,000 to 74,999. Not a whole lot, but we do have a difference in the median, so that generally these four categories are pretty much the same. So there's not as much of a trend in one direction or the other as you might have expected. If we look at the education level, we do see that the median for people that have less than high school is 9, and then it drops to 5 for all the other three groups. So that generally speaking, we would say that education level has very little to do with how much you use the telephone, your cell phone as a telephone device. These numbers here, you can see that the college level people, slightly higher than some college, but lower than the high school diploma people. Generally speaking, we would expect to see the younger people with higher numbers, and the younger people will have a lower education level, and they will have a lower income. So we would expect to see that, and that's pretty much what we see. Maybe not as clearly as we might have expected. In this pie chart here, what they've done is they asked people, okay, if you were going to get contacted, somebody's going to contact you, how do you want them to contact you? Do you want them to call you, or you want them to send you a text message? 31% of the people said send me a text message. 53% said call me. 14% said, well, it depends, and which makes sense. It depends on what you're going to call me about. That same piece of information is now put in a different kind of graph, and this is how do I prefer to be contacted. Now, if we look at this, to make sense of that, we have to make sure we understand what it says. Down here it says, if I receive 0 to 10 text messages a day, what I would like for you to do is excuse me, contact me. 70% of the people here, 70% said contact me by making a phone call. 17% said contact me through text messaging. Now what that means, of course, is that I don't get very many text messages a day, and I prefer not to get them. I prefer to get phone calls. So as we go from 0 to 10 messages to 11 to 20 to 21 to 50 to over 50, we'll notice that pretty much people are getting contacted the way they want to get contacted. In other words, if I receive over 50 text messages a day, I'm likely to want to receive more my information through text messaging rather than through phone calls. So generally people are getting the messages in the manner in which they prefer to get the messages. Okay. Well, that's the last graph on here. The only other thing I'm just going to mention very briefly is at the bottom of this PDF, it has a section telling you how they did the research, the methodology. So if you're interested in that, you can take a look. Okay, that should give us a pretty good overview of what's going on here with text messaging and voice messaging using our cell phones.